light is actually, in returning to this incredible country, was really to feel American again. I'd like to think of Santa Fe, before I get going, as a border town. Now, I know that geographically you might not be a border town, but I kind of think, and maybe in some more esoteric and whatever ways, this is really Borderlands here as well, okay? Maybe in third consciousness or something like that, I'm not sure, but I think you qualify as an honorary border town, even if not a physical one. So, this evening, I'd like to read a little bit of a passage, and then I'll open it up to questions. And I'm going to start about a third of the way through of Borderlands USA.
You better explain where that title comes from.
Oh, okay. With pleasure. Borderlands USA is something that I made up, but it's because the trip is a trip that I took all around the remote borders of the U.S. So I followed as closely as possible to the border without getting arrested. And at this point, you will find your fearless narrator in a silver-plated VW Beetle. And as I mentioned, about a third of the way in. And I'm actually rounding Lake Huron from a certain blandness, then a kind of horror, to a peculiar darkness that is only found in the Midwest. I'm going to start with a quotation. It's from Alexis de Tocqueville, A Fortnight in the Wilderness, which Mom gave me. If we had indeed only wanted to see forests, our host in Detroit would have been right in telling us that we need not go very far, for a mile out of town, the road goes into the forest and never comes out of it. Without resorting to the interstate, it was a long slog through downtown Cleveland to return lakeside via the Jackie Mayer Miss America Highway on Ohio Route 2. But delay, along with stop-and-go traffic, have their rewards, such as the sighting of a small church sign on the front lawn of a Baptist church that read, "Remembering September 11th, we are still praying. Amen." So many town names, from Geneva on the Lake to Oberlin, Berlin Heights, and Sandusky, spoke of a Middle Europe background that must have made immigrants like Tony feel at home. But today would be Michigan's day, as we climbed a long, wide peninsula stretching north into the freshwater seas of the Great Lakes. Here we entered a new land, a car-friendly fiefdom, where the speed limit jumped to 70 miles per hour, even on two-laners, and gas prices fell to the trip's lowest. Such thrilling speed limits were of limited use, however, for the highways were under constant construction, not surprisingly for a roady state that aspires to the zipless drive. Yet with the promise of road nirvana came road bossiness, with signs sprinkled along work areas warning, "Kill, injure a worker, $7,500 fine and 15 years, and another as if to clarify the consequences of the first, "Prison area, do not pick up hitchhikers." The cars themselves were all American, from what used to be called the Big Three, recently down to the Big Two. Charlie herself, that's my VW, herself began to feel foreign, with notions of belonging and not belonging. Punch buggies were so rare in the Midwest that children no longer showed the slightest interest in our passing. While running afoul of road construction, one of driving's worst risk factors, says the American Automobile Association, I was still startled when the lakefront interstate that I hoped would lift us up and over Detroit's outskirts, and like a spinnaker slowly emptying of wind, drop us gently in its center, was closed to traffic. Instead, one and all had to exit the freeway and run the gauntlet of the city's many outer rings. I was already on edge, as I had arranged a visit that day to a mosque near downtown Detroit. Ever since learning atop his namesake mountain how Antoine Cadillac founded the city, I knew that Detroit, as part of my rough border itinerary, would be in Charlie's headlights. Blissfully unaware of many things demographic, I had recently discovered that Detroit is home to America's largest Muslim population. So I figured, what better place to visit a homegrown mosque? I've benefited from much shoestring travel overseas and have seen the insides of some impressive mosques in my day, including the Hagia Sophia and Blue Mosque in Istanbul, to name just two. They are awesome and beautiful to behold, with striking rich colors, such as the cobalt blue tiles of Jerusalem's Dome of the Rock, or the black and gold placards lifted up to the heavenward corners of the Hagia Sophia, once a Greek Orthodox basilica. The lyricism of the flowing Arabic calligraphy cannot be matched. The riches of Arabic architecture extolled in such scholarly works as Robert Byron's Between the Wars travel yarn, The Road to Oxiana, which I had read during the invasion of Afghanistan, where Oxiana is found. Perhaps the Islamic center of America would not be as grand, but my purpose was not architectural tourism. It was to get a first impression of a fast-growing immigrant group. After living abroad for a while, one tends to see the similarities among Americans more than the differences between them. This is reason enough to ship cattle cars of politicians overseas, so they can return home to better appreciate the glue that holds us together. Although what precise glue that is still eludes me. On the downside, one's love of country and enthusiasm to mingle with compatriots again, whose charms are suddenly manifold, can also make you reckless compared to the stay-at-home who watches the nightly crime roll on network news. So it was, with full of feelings of goodwill and American invincibility, that I turned off a minor highway and sauntered down Joy Road in search of a mosque. In short order, the buildings became more widely spaced than usual for a city. Familiar commercial names and pedestrian traffic all but disappeared, and store signs became hand-painted. At times like these, you realize not only the differentness of the surroundings, but the fact of your differentness within them. The lack of pale faces in approaching cars was one such indicator. Such was my distraction that when I came upon the intersection of Joy and Greenfield, where I'd been told to find the center, I went sailing through without spotting anything remotely like a mosque. Among the hand-painted signs in seen-better buildings, it was difficult to locate street numbers, so I drove on for several long blocks until I realized that I and the numbers were moving in the wrong direction. Whereupon I tried to find a safe space to turn around as inconspicuously as possible in a shiny new silver bug. In my nervousness, I had overshot the mosque, which off to the left and just before the intersection was next to a large discount store. After parking behind the driveway's sole car, I went in and asked to see Hassan. The interior was institutional with fluorescent stripes overhead, and the young man behind the raised counter replied that he himself was Hassan, clean-cut, thin, with a befuddled look to match my own. "Oh, hi, my name is Ben, the guy who called yesterday to see if it was okay to come by for a visit." Yes, you're most welcome." We shook hands. Pause. "Do you mind if I look around?" No, please, let me show you." And as Hassan led me into a large hall, he asked, "And what brings you to Detroit?" I told him a few lies, something about driving across the U.S. and never having visited Detroit before, and when in Detroit, why not visit a mosque? Anything save divulging my secret mission of border defense. From the large dining room and meeting hall, Hassan led me back to a pair of swinging doors, and opening one up, ushered me into the prayer hall flooded with green light. I recalled from visits to working mosques in the Middle East that you must remove your shoes, so I asked if I could do the same. Hassan replied no, and while they walked into the shafts of green sunlight in the middle of the prayer hall, the size of half a basketball court, I held back by the flapping doors. I had been told in the Mideast that in such a place, including the Midwest, all you have to say is Inshallah out several times and you're converted. By now Hassan had figured out I was harmless and didn't mind sharing his story. He told me he's Lebanese by birth and married to a Lebanese-American woman whom he'd met in Beirut, that his brother lives in Switzerland, so it wasn't much of a stretch for him to move to the U.S. with his young wife. "And are you Christian?" he asked in turn, and when I replied yes, "What kind?" I didn't reply lapsed and instead said Protestant, but knew it didn't really matter, for regardless he invited me to the next service, days away. As though expected of me, I asked what impact September 11th had had on his life, if he had felt any discrimination, etc., among other foolish questions that once and all proved that I should never ever be a reporter. Hassan took it gracefully and replied diplomatically that while it was a bit harder to cross into Windsor, Ontario, he himself had never felt any discrimination against his person, but had heard of a few instances from others, though they were really nothing, he said. The common sense of immigrant Americans can be astounding, if only the natives could always be so. When I asked him about the size of the Muslim population in Detroit and if it was quickly growing as they say, he encouraged me to visit what is to be the largest mosque in America, under construction not far away. So I did, without losing the way, and was impressed by the size of the mosque's central dome, temporary black with tar tile roofing. A construction sign read, "Future project of the Islamic Center of America, expanding to serve our community." And all around the construction chain-link fence, attached near the poles, were small, fluttering U.S. flags, in a kind of inclusive security perimeter, little talismans of peace. I drove on restlessly that evening, pressing on when I shouldn't have. After Port Huron, the road snakes up Huron itself, the 5th largest lake in the world, and the first great lake seen by white men. From a roadside plaque, I learned that in 1615, Champlain, a busy guy, had discovered the freshwater sea by following the Ottawa River route, but that it took another half-century before the French fully appreciated the lake's size. It didn't take me quite as long, but almost, and I started to look for a place for the night. I had thought there would be plentiful options, but was wrong again. The lakefront is lined with summer homes and an endless series of mailboxes, some of original design, such as the Shorts family spelled with white letters over a polka-dotted pair of wooden underpants. The further north I went, the fewer overnight options there were, most of which were shuttered in any event. The summer season was over and done with, the traffic flown. Near Port Huron, I had turned my nose up at a depressingly dark hotel room for $40. With only one dim-wadded bulb in the ceiling and lacking a bedside lamp, reading would be difficult. I had a small flashlight with me, but if I wanted to go camping, why pay for the honor? I am what you might call a light freak. If I don't get enough sunlight during the day, my vitamin D levels plummet, and I become cranky. And when I get cranky, I sleep a lot, which explains why I barely remember the 20-odd northern winters of my youth. At night, if I don't have a couple of high-wattage incandescent bulbs to brighten things up and lift typeface off of book pages, I plug in the television and turn violent. So Charlie and I soldiered on, and when I admitted our options were nil, the odometer already clocked 25 miles since Port Huron, removing the temptation to turn back to mediocrity. It was getting dark, and still we pressed on into the night, as Lake Huron, when not blocked by residences or mailboxes to our right, became a sea of inky blankness under a black sky that dipped over the horizon and continued down, for all I could tell, to the Earth's core. Not even when two deer jumped out of the enveloping dark, causing a lone car ahead to brake and swerve, did I take it as a sign to pull off the road and set up my small tent on someone's driveway. Charlie's dashboard lights flickered daintily in front of me. This was our first extended night drive together, and I was lulled into thinking that they would lead me home to a safe harbor somewhere on the American landmass. As a fishing trawler is beckoned back to port, the small points of hope twinkling ahead. By 9:30 p.m., I breached Bay City, where feeling anything but king-like, or in a holiday mood, I consumed a kingly burger before falling into a king-size bed at Holiday Inn.
Yay!
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Did you ever feel in danger?
Not really.
Okay.
Again, I might have felt a little more at risk at this excerpt that I just read, but not really. I did. I felt like an invincible American coming back to do good. Mm-hmm. So how could anything happen to me? Mm-hmm. I was invincible. I received a lot of advice before I took the trip, most of which I didn't follow through on. And that was one thing, because I realized, a cell phone helps you if you get into trouble in a city. But if I were to break down in the middle of the North Dakotan border with Canada, there wouldn't be any cell reception anyway, so I just had to depend on a good Samaritan. So I took that trip kind of with the thought, well, I'm going to let happen what happens, and if I need help, I'll just wait for it.
Did you name your Volkswagen Charlie have anything to do with travels with Charlie?
Absolutely right. Yeah. I actually, I don't want to drop names, but since you asked, I had the fortune of sitting down with John Updike before I started the trip, and he mentioned two books. One was Travels with Charlie, and the other was He Leased Moon's Blue Highways.
Yeah.
And so based on that, and I actually started reading Travels with Charlie when I started the trip. And so since I had time to name my car, it came to me at a certain point, why not? So it was my French poodle. And since I often forget to mention that, there are images that came along with the book. And I've tried, when I launched the book, I was able to do a photo exhibit at the same time with the launch. And one of the nice things about the ebook is that between chapters, there's I think 39 full color image from the trip. And the nice thing about pictures, and this way, is it's a little bit, it's not quite two books in one, but the picture essay tells a parallel but different story than the one that I recount in the text. So for visually oriented people who like technology, it's a nice option. But I just want to warn you, there are two ebooks available. One is all black and white, so it doesn't have the pictures. It has the designs, but it doesn't have the pictures. So anyway, I'll throw that out there.
Like, did you drop back into something totally familiar, or what was your experience?
Excellent question, because one of the tripwires of being an expat is that we think that culture shock is when you go overseas. It sounds as though, okay, you're going to a different culture, you're going to be shocked, but you'll try to get along and you'll adapt and eventually it'll be okay. In my experience, the culture shock is actually when you come home. And the reason is that when you come home, you're actually expecting things to be the same when they are radically different. Mm-hmm. And why are they radically different? It wasn't that the country had changed, it's that I had changed. You go overseas and you can't help it. You come back, and so your bifocals are out of whack. And so everything looks different, even if it's the exact same thing where you were before. Wow. And so the culture shock is on that end. In this case, part of the quest of this journey was to see if my country had changed. My country had changed. Right? So 9/11 had occurred. I'd been away for a long time. And so the question was, okay, is it still the country I know? And when it comes down to it, yes and no. But the truth is that while the country had changed, I had changed more. And so it was difficult, but it was a somewhat radical lobotomy to go out and do a trip like this, because it forced me to get over the culture shock and to make peace with changes in the country and changes within me.